The age of alien control. For thousands of years, the Galactic Council had believed itself unchallenged rulers of the stars. They were an ancient collection of mighty empires, each species proud of its fleets and armies, and each one secure in the knowledge that no unknown race could ever rise to threaten them. Entire sectors were mapped and patrolled. Entire colonies existed only to fuel the engines of their endless control. They spoke often in grand halls of their wisdom and of their so-called balance of power. But in truth it was nothing more than arrogance layered with fear that something new might upset their grip. The council worlds stretched across spiral arms glittering with power. Their fleets darkened skies of 100 planets. Their soldiers marched in perfect lines trained from birth to obey. Orders carried the weight of law, and law carried the weight of death. Any species that resisted was crushed quickly. Any culture that questioned them was silenced forever, and soon the galaxy had grown used to this quiet rule. No one dreamed of freedom for too long because freedom was punished. The elder races looked down upon what they called lesser beings. These were species considered too young, too wild, or too primitive to be trusted with real power. The council kept them under watch, gave them limits on what they could build, and often harvested their best resources, or even their people in the name of order. It had been this way for so long that most races had given up hoping for change. It was simply how life was in the galaxy. In the middle of one such meeting, a chamber filled with tall figures robed in silks and armors of many styles, an argument broke out over resource routes. One empire demanded more fuel, another demanded more soldiers be sent to their front lines, and yet another demanded tribute from a weaker colony. The voices echoed through the hall, and as always they ended in compromise that only strengthened the council. The hall quieted, and the Speaker of the Assembly rose to declare once again that the council controlled the fate of the universe. That was when the first murmur of something strange appeared on the record. A communication officer entered with hesitation. His skin pale and his eyes wide, he spoke of a signal that had not been authorized. He explained it came from a system long forgotten, a small yellow star with a blue and green planet orbiting close to its warmth. The record showed that this world had once been catalogued but dismissed as a place too violent, too unstable for survival. Yet the signal was there, persistent and undeniable. It was old at first, a faint recording, traveling through space, a human voice singing and speaking words no alien could understand. The council laughed, thinking it nothing more than static from a dead world. But as days passed, the signals grew clearer. More messages came through, and then images not of ruins, not of broken cities, but of thriving civilizations, of machines flying through skies, of vast structures lit with energy, and of humans walking proudly upon their world. They were strong-faced, determined, and alive. The chamber grew tense as the truth unfolded. Humanity was not extinct. Humanity was not forgotten. Humanity had risen in silence while the council was looking elsewhere. The arrogance of the council was shaken slightly, though they tried not to show it. Some called for immediate investigation, others demanded silence, believing the less the council knew, the better. Still others whispered that perhaps humanity should be ignored, as had always been done before. Yet deep inside, many felt the cold touch of unease, for this was not the first time they had heard of strange resilience on that world. Stories long buried in archives spoke of humans surviving conditions that would kill most species of their bodies, adapting to violence and chaos, and of their ability to turn weakness into strength. And now here was proof on the screen, clear, undeniable proof humanity was calling, and the galaxy could no longer pretend Earth did not exist. The Speaker of the Assembly struck his staff upon the ground to silence the hall. His voice boomed that the council controlled the universe, and that no forgotten race would ever change, that his words echoed with pride. But behind his eyes was a flicker of doubt he could not hide. The chamber had seen it. The era of quiet domination was trembling on its edge, and though they did not yet understand the storm had begun, humanity had returned to the stage of the universe, and nothing would be the same again. Humanity's awakening. The council tried to dismiss the first signals as an accident of time and distance, but the messages from Earth did not stop. Instead, they grew in strength as human transmissions from centuries past finally reached deeper into the stars, carrying with them music, laughter, anger, and stories that no alien could fully understand. But all of them felt a pulse of something alive. Soon these echoes of a forgotten world became a constant reminder in the chamber each day, new fragments arriving until even the most arrogant members could no longer pretend it was meaningless. Curiosity spread among the younger races who had lived under the shadow of the Council for generations. They whispered among themselves about the humans who seemed fearless, even in their simplest messages. There was no groveling in their words, no begging for survival. Instead, the voices spoke of discovery, of spaceflight, of dreams, to walk among stars as equals. The more the Council tried to hide these transmissions, the more the whispers grew until resistance to their silence appeared in corners of colonies that had long-forgotten hope. Then, without warning, a new event shattered the illusion of control. A ship appeared on the edge of Council space. Unlike the polished silver and gold of Council fleets, this vessel was dark metal, scarred and strange in design. Its engines burned bright and its shape was sharp like a blade cutting through the void. It bore markings that no alien recognized, but soon scanners confirmed what many feared. The ship was human, and it was not a drifting relic. It was alive, and piloted, and it had crossed light years to stand at their doorstep. When the ship entered orbit of a Council station, panic spread through the halls. Soldiers rushed to arms, weapons targeted the intruder, and commanders demanded orders. But before anyone could act, a transmission cut through every channel in the sector. A human face appeared, rugged and unflinching eyes, sharp as steel, voice calm, but carrying a weight that no one could deny. The human spoke in translated words clear enough for all to understand. We are humanity. We have watched and we have waited. Now we are ready to speak. The chamber erupted in disbelief. How could a race thought lost stand before them with such boldness? The envoy was summoned to appear at the heart of the assembly, and though many expected weakness, the human walked into the great hall without fear. He wore no heavy armor, no display of power, only a simple uniform with a small emblem over his chest. Yet as he stepped forward, the silence was heavy. Every eye followed him, and every whisper spoke of danger and awe. The speaker demanded to know why humanity dared to enter Council space without permission. The human smiled, not with arrogance, but with a quiet certainty, and answered that humanity had grown beyond the reach of permission. He explained that for centuries Earth had been ignored, left to struggle against its own storms, its own wars, and its own chaos. And in that crucible, humanity had been forged stronger than any Council could imagine. He told them Earth was no fragile colony, but a world of constant trial where only the strongest survived, and that such survival had given humans a will that no empire could break. The Council mocked his words, calling humanity reckless and unfit to walk among the stars. They spoke of law and order, of traditions that had stood for ages. They promised swift punishment if humans continued to trespass. But as their laughter filled the chamber, the human envoy raised his hand and projected images into the air of fleets hidden in the void, of colonies flourishing on worlds once thought uninhabitable, of technologies that combined brilliance and desperation into something new. The laughter died away, replaced by uneasy silence. The envoy looked at them with eyes that held no fear and spoke again. Humanity does not come to beg and does not come to kneel. Humanity comes to stand and to speak as equals. The chamber grew heavy with the weight of those words. For the first time in ages, the Council felt the ground beneath them shift. For the first time in generations, they were not certain of their control. Humanity had awoken from silence, and the universe itself seemed to hold its breath, waiting for what would come next. Clash of words. The Council chamber was vast and filled with the banners of ancient empires. Each color told of conquest, each symbol a reminder of centuries of control. The human envoy stood alone in the center of the floor, as hundreds of alien eyes glared down upon him. Some looked with curiosity, some with open hatred, and others with quiet unease. The speaker rose from his throne, his voice deep and commanding. He declared that humanity had no place in the council, that their sudden appearance was an insult to the order of the galaxy, and that trespass would not be forgiven. The human did not flinch. His voice was steady as he answered, and his words cut through the silence like a blade. He told them that humanity had not come uninvited. Humanity had been here all along, waiting in silence and watching every move the council made. He reminded them that for all their fleets and power, they had failed to notice Earth's rise. He revealed that human scholars had studied intercepted transmissions for generations, learning alien languages and histories, while the council had dismissed them as forgotten. His words turned mockery into unease. An elder delegate of a reptilian empire hissed in anger, demanding proof of these claims. The human turned calmly and spoke of battles long hidden in the council's archives, secret wars that had been buried to protect reputations he named, systems by name, battles by date, fleets that had vanished and technologies that had been outlawed. The alien delegates froze as the envoy spoke truths that only the most guarded among them should have known. The chamber rippled with whispers, and the council leaders felt the weight of exposure. Another delegate shouted that humanity was reckless and that their presence threatened stability. The human replied that stability built on chains was not order, but fear. He spoke of the countless species who had been stripped of their future by council decrees, forced to remain weak, so the powerful could sleep without fear. He told them that humanity had seen enough to know this galaxy was not ruled by wisdom but by greed. His voice carried not anger but conviction, and it struck deeper than any threat could have. The chamber erupted with shouting. Some delegates demanded his execution, others demanded answers, and still others demanded that the speaker silence him. But the human did not stop. He stepped forward and told them plainly that humanity did not seek their approval. Humanity had risen from a world where storms tore cities apart, where beasts stronger than armies stalked forests, where men and women fought against one another, and yet still built wonders. He said that such a world had forged humanity into something the council could never understand, and that was why their control would one day fall. The speaker slammed his staff to the ground and called him a liar and a thief of secrets. He warned that humanity would be crushed for daring to threaten the council. The human only met his gaze, and for the first time in centuries the speaker faltered. He saw no fear in the envoy's eyes, no hesitation, only a quiet promise that his words were true. The silence that followed was more powerful than any roar, and in that silence, the council felt a truth they could not admit aloud. Humanity had studied them. Humanity had endured, and humanity was ready. When the human finally left the chamber, the delegates erupted into furious debate. Some argued for immediate war, others whispered of negotiations, and still others said nothing at all, fearing the truth that the envoy had spoken. None could agree, but all of them felt the same shadow pressing upon them. The age of unquestioned dominance was breaking. The galaxy had been shaken not by a fleet or by a weapon, but by words spoken without fear. Humanity had clashed with the council, not with fire, but with truth, and the echo of that clash would spread far beyond those walls. The first demonstration. The debate within the council stretched for many cycles after the human envoy departed. Each empire returned to its own world, whispering in secret halls and sending coded transmissions across the stars. No one could deny the power of the word spoken, and no one could erase the unease that now lived in the hearts of rulers. Yet most still convinced themselves that humanity could not truly stand against the might of ancient empires. They told themselves that one ship was nothing, that one envoy was nothing, that one world could never threaten the order of 1,000. So they decided to test humanity. A fleet was dispatched to a border sector under the command of a veteran admiral whose name carried fear across many systems. His fleet was large and proud, with dozens of cruisers armed with weapons that had shattered countless rebellions before. The council declared that this display was not war, but a lesson, a warning to remind humans that their words meant nothing in the face of power. The fleet surged through the void until it found the human vessel waiting alone in the emptiness of space. The admiral laughed when the scans confirmed what he saw: one ship against many. He ordered his ships to encircle the intruder. He opened a channel and promised the human captain that mercy would be granted if the vessel surrendered immediately. The human captain appeared on his screen young and calm, with no trace of fear in his voice. He simply replied that surrender was not in the nature of his people, and then he cut the channel, leaving silence that burned like insult. The order was given, and the council fleet unleashed its fire. Bright beams and heavy missiles filled the void. Yet the human ship moved with impossible speed. Its engines burned brighter than any alien design. Its hull twisted at sharp angles as if gravity itself bent to its will. The first volley missed completely. The second struck, but the human vessel shimmered and absorbed the impact with a field unknown to council science. Then, in a single movement, the human ship retaliated. A beam of concentrated energy lanced out, striking a council cruiser and cutting it in half before alarms could even sound. The fleet reeled in shock. The admiral shouted for full engagement, but confusion spread through his ranks as the human vessel danced between them. Its weapons were few, but precise. Each shot crippling a ship, each maneuver leaving the enemy firing into empty void. The battle that should have ended in moments stretched into terror as ships were destroyed one by the lone intruder. When at last the admiral's flagship was targeted, he realized, too late, that he had underestimated the truth. His ship's shields collapsed under a storm of energy blasts, and his command tower fell silent. The human ship did not linger to finish the fleet. Instead, it pulled away, engines roaring as it vanished, into faster-than-light travel, leaving behind wreckage drifting in silence. The message was clear. Humanity did not need numbers to win. Humanity needed only will and skill. News of the battle spread faster than any council order could contain. Colonies whispered of the impossible victory of one human vessel, defeating a fleet. Entire species that had known nothing but fear felt a spark of hope burning in their hearts. The council tried to dismiss the story as lies, but the images of shattered cruisers, drifting lifeless in space, could not be erased. Even the oldest empires began to question what other secrets humanity held. If one ship could do this, what could a fleet accomplish? The speaker called for unity, declaring that the council would never bow to fear. He demanded that more fleets be prepared, that humanity must be crushed before their influence spread further. But behind closed doors, even he could not ignore the truth. The age of control had met its first fracture. The council's invincible fleets had been humiliated not by numbers, not by overwhelming firepower, but by the hands of humans who had risen from a forgotten world. The universe was watching, and the silence after the first demonstration was louder than war drums. The war ignites. The destruction of the council fleet sent waves of fear through the galaxy. Entire colonies that once lived in silence now whispered the name of humanity with hope, while the ruling empires whispered the same name with dread. The council could not allow such humiliation to stand. They gathered in secret chambers, their voices heavy with rage. They declared that humanity had shown its true nature as a threat, and that the only answer was war. They promised themselves that swift violence would silence the storm before it spread, but already it was too late for silence. Across the stars, fleets were prepared with greater numbers than ever before. Massive dreadnoughts and carriers were drawn from hidden reserves. Weapons forbidden by treaty were unlocked from vaults. Entire armies were conscripted for a war the council insisted would be short and decisive. Yet as their fleets burned across the void, they did not realize humanity was waiting. Humanity had been preparing long before. The first envoy ever stepped into their chamber. On Earth and on distant colonies, humans had built fleets in shadows not as large as the council's, but forged with cunning and desperation. Their ships were not beautiful, but they were deadly. Each vessel carried strange hybrid technology built from fragments of alien signals combined with human ingenuity. They were fast, adaptable, and resilient. They did not fight in rigid formations like the council. Instead, they moved like hunters striking, from angles no enemy predicted and fading before retaliation could land. When the council's armadas struck the first human colonies, they expected surrender. Instead, they found resistance that shook them to their core. Human ground, soldiers fought, with ferocity that seemed endless. They turned landscapes into traps. They used storms, mountains, and oceans as weapons. They fought in silence, and they fought with screams, and when they fell, their comrades fought harder still. The council commanders had seen rebellion before, but never like this. They whispered among themselves that humanity fought as though war was not tragedy. But instinct space battles turned even worse for the council. Their massive fleets expected victory by sheer number, but the humans refused to fight on their terms. They ambushed convoys with tiny, fast ships armed with weapons strong enough to tear holes in armor. They struck at fuel depots and communication hubs, crippling fleets before battles even began. They infiltrated systems with stealth craft, landing small teams that destroyed shipyards from within. No matter how many ships the council sent, humanity always seemed to be one step ahead. Alien generals began to fear the unknown. For every strategy they planned, humanity seemed to have already prepared an answer. Council soldiers spoke of human unpredictability. They said humans laughed in the face of certain death. They said humans turned their own weapons against them with terrifying creativity. One report even told of humans capturing alien artillery and using it within hours against its creators. The council dismissed these stories as exaggerations, but deep inside their admirals knew the stories were true. As the war spread across systems, more and more species watched with fascination. Races long oppressed by the council began to see a chance for freedom. Small uprisings broke out in distant colonies, sparked not by orders from Earth but by courage inspired by humanity's defiance. The council tried to stamp them out, but their forces were stretched thin. They could not fight humanity and their own colonies at once. Every attempt to crush Earth only seemed to strengthen the flame that was spreading across the galaxy. Within the great chamber, the speaker raged louder than ever, declaring that humanity must be annihilated. He ordered every empire to commit their full fleets to the war. But behind the mask of authority, his voice trembled. He remembered the eyes of the envoy and the way a single ship had humbled an armada. He remembered the whispers of colonies rising, and he knew the war was no longer simple. Humanity had ignited something far greater than rebellion. Humanity had turned the galaxy itself into a battlefield of ideas, and the council's grip was loosening with every passing day. The breaking point. The galaxy was burning, and still the council refused to admit defeat. They summoned every empire under their banner, demanding the sacrifice of wealth, soldiers, and ships to crush humanity once and for all. They called it a final war, one that would erase the shame of defeat and restore the old order. The great fleets gathered in numbers unseen since the dawn of the council. Hundreds of ships filled the void around their core worlds, their engines glowing like a false sun. It was meant to be a show of strength, but the very scale betrayed their fear. Humanity watched carefully. They knew they could not match such numbers with ships alone. They knew the council had more guns, more soldiers, and more resources than Earth could ever hope to command. But humans had something the council could not copy. They had imagination born from struggle. They had unity born from survival. They had a will sharpened by centuries of conflict on a world that had never known mercy. Humanity prepared not to face the council with brute force, but with cunning. When the council fleets advanced, they found empty systems waiting. They found stations abandoned and colonies stripped clean. They mocked humanity for fleeing. But the laughter ended when their supply lines were cut. Entire fleets went dark as fuel vanished. Entire outposts were lost to sabotage. Human strike teams slipped through shadows, sabotaging communications and planting chaos behind enemy lines. Even in systems the council thought secure, sudden explosions lit the skies, and their soldiers turned on one another in confusion. Humanity was not fighting a single battle. Humanity was fighting everywhere at once. The council admirals grew desperate. They gathered the full strength of their fleets to strike directly at Earth. They believed that by destroying the cradle of humanity, they could end the war in one stroke. And so their armadas advanced through the void, blazing with confidence. They expected fear. They expected surrender. Instead, they found a world united in defiance. The skies around Earth burned with human ships of every shape, old freighters refitted into weapons, warships built from nothing but scavenged parts and prototypes that defied known science. They were outnumbered 10-1, but every ship moved with a ferocity no council commander had ever seen. Battle that followed was chaos. The Council unleashed waves of fire that shook the heavens, but humanity refused to break. Human ships moved like predators, striking the flanks of the great armadas, tearing at them with precision. Each time a human vessel fell, another two appeared from the shadows to strike again. Even as wreckage filled the void, humanity fought harder. Their transmissions carried not orders of retreat, but songs of defiance, chants of unity, words that inspired every soldier to fight until the very end. The turning point came when human engineers activated something the Council had never imagined. They turned the Council's own weapons back upon them, captured dreadnought cannons mounted onto human stations, orbital platforms that redirected alien energy into devastating beams. The fleets that had marched with pride now found themselves blasted apart by their own technology. The shock was too much for even the most disciplined commanders. Whole formations collapsed. In panic, admirals screamed orders into dead channels as their ships scattered. Across the galaxy, the news spread. The Council had thrown everything at humanity and still could not win. Species that had once lived in chains began to rise in rebellion. Entire colonies declared independence and joined the human cause. They saw not conquerors but liberators standing against the oppressors who had ruled for too long. The Council was breaking its fleets, shattered its colonies, burning its authority. Collapsing humanity had done what no one believed possible. They had broken the unshakable order of the galaxy within the Council chamber. The speaker stared into silence. The voices of his allies were gone, replaced by screams of rebellion and desperate pleas for aid. He realized with cold dread that the war was lost not only on the battlefield but in the hearts of the galaxy. Humanity had proven something greater than military strength. They had shown that the Council could bleed. And if the Council could bleed, then it could fall. The breaking point had come, and the universe would never return to the old way. Humanity answers the call. The galaxy had reached its final moment of decision. The once mighty fleets of the Council were shattered there, banners broken and their authority reduced to whispers. Entire empires that once shouted their loyalty now sat in silence, too afraid or too exhausted to speak. Colonies that had lived under fear for centuries now rose with courage, fueled by the sight of humanity refusing to kneel. The Speaker of the Assembly looked out over an empty chamber, where rows of seats once filled with proud rulers now stood vacant. He felt the weight of a crumbling empire pressing down on his shoulders. In contrast, the human fleet spread across the stars not as conquerors but as defenders. They were battered and scarred from countless battles, their ships dented and scorched. Their soldiers weary from endless struggle, but their resolve had not weakened. For every fallen world they had fought twice as hard for the next. For every ally that joined their side, their voice grew louder. Humanity was no longer the forgotten species of a backwater planet. They were now the symbol of defiance and freedom. The Council made one last attempt to salvage its rule. They sent envoys to meet the humans, not to surrender but to demand terms. They spoke of peace under Council law. They spoke of mercy for those who bent the knee, and they promised to grant humanity a seat at the table if only Earth swore loyalty. The human envoy who stood before them was not the same man who had first entered their chamber, but his eyes carried the same steady fire. He listened to their offers without expression, and then he spoke words that shattered what little hope they had left. Humanity would never kneel. Humanity had not bled to trade chains for a golden collar. Humanity had risen for freedom and would fight until every world had the right to choose its own path. The envoys left in silence, and the speaker understood that the Council's reign was over. He called for fleets to defend the core worlds, but none came. He called for soldiers to hold the capital, but none answered. He looked into the void and saw rebellion, spreading like fire across dry grass. Entire sectors declared independence while others pledged loyalty to the human alliance. In every system, voices rose not in fear, but in hope. Humanity had broken the silence of the galaxy, and now the galaxy was roaring. The final confrontation came not in a great battle, but in the collapse of the Council itself. Their fleets scattered, their soldiers defected, and their worlds opened their gates to new banners. When the speaker tried to rally his people, they turned their backs on him. Humanity did not march into the capital with weapons drawn. Instead, they arrived with a message broadcast across every world and every station. Humanity declared that they did not seek an empire. Humanity declared that they would not replace one chain with another. Humanity declared that the age of domination was over, and that a new era of freedom had begun. For many, the words were almost harder to believe than the victories humanity had the power to rule, but they refused. Instead, they called for unity. They invited every species to stand as equals and to decide their own futures. They promised aid to those who suffered and protection to those who asked for it. They offered not fear but hope, and it spread faster than fire. The galaxy trembled, not at the sound of weapons, but at the sound of freedom ringing across the stars. On Earth, the people looked up at their sky filled with returning fleets. They saw ships scarred from battle yet triumphant. They saw soldiers weary but unbroken, and they knew their sacrifices had not been in vain. The humans who had once sent lonely signals into the void had now returned with the answer to a question the galaxy had never dared to ask. What happens when a people born of storms and struggle rise together and call out against tyranny? The answer was written in every shattered fleet, in every liberated colony, and in every heart that now beat with courage. The Speaker of the Fallen Council sat alone in his hall as the lights dimmed. He whispered that he had once thought the Council controlled the universe. He realized too late that no one can truly control the universe, for the universe belongs to those who refuse to surrender. Humanity had proven that truth with fire and with sacrifice, with courage and with will. The age of alien dominance was gone. The age of humanity had begun. And so the galaxy changed forever. Not by conquest, but by defiance, not by chains, but by freedom. Humanity had answered the call, and the universe would never be the same again. A new dawn. The galaxy drifted in silence after the collapse of the council ships that once carried the banners of oppression now hung powerless in orbit. Abandoned or captured worlds that had known only fear woke to a morning without chains. Their skies no longer filled with fleets of conquerors, but with the bright shimmer of freedom. Across countless systems, celebrations rose as beings of every shape and world realized that the age of domination was truly gone. Humanity stood at the center of this transformation, their fleets scarred and weathered, their soldiers weary and broken by long campaigns, but their spirit unshaken. They had not risen to seize a throne. They had risen to tear one down. In every broadcast they sent, they reminded the galaxy that the struggle had not been for glory or conquest, but for dignity. They reminded everyone that humanity itself had been dismissed and ignored, and yet they had risen because they refused to let silence be their future. The fall of the Council did not mean the end of struggle, for the galaxy was wide and filled with wounds left by centuries of tyranny. Rebellions flared into conflicts as species long crushed tried to find their place again. There was chaos in many corners, but now, for the first time, there was also choice. Humanity did not dictate terms. Instead, they stood as guides, offering support where asked and weapons only when needed. They built alliances, not empires, and in this difference lay the true victory. Among the ruins of the council chamber, the speaker sat in darkness. The hall, once filled with pride, was nothing but stone and silence. He had believed the council eternal. He had believed power unshakable. Now he understood the truth, whispered in every corner of the galaxy. Control built upon fear cannot last forever. The memory of humanity's rise would haunt him until his last breath, for it had proven that will could stand against any fleet, and that unity could break any chain. On Earth, the people watched their skies as ships returned home. The oceans reflected the lights of vessels, built for war but carrying peace. They buried their dead with honor. They remembered their sacrifices with tears and pride. And when they looked to the stars, they did not see threats, but possibilities. For the first time in history, Earth was not alone. The galaxy had heard their voice and had answered. Humanity was no longer forgotten. Humanity had become the promise of something greater. In the quiet after war, a child stood on a hillside looking up at the night. Above her, the stars burned, bright, endless, and full of mystery. Her parents spoke of battles fought and victories won, but she only thought of the future. She asked if the stars now belonged to humanity, and her mother smiled and said the stars belong to everyone. The lesson of war was not possession but freedom, and the humans had carried that truth into the galaxy. The story of humanity would be told for generations. Aliens would speak of the time when forgotten voices rose to shake the order of the universe. They would speak of humans who fought with fire and courage and imagination. They would speak of a species born on a violent world who carried that resilience into the stars. They would speak of a new dawn when the universe changed forever. And so, the Council's reign ended not with silence but with a chorus of voices united humanity had called and the galaxy had answered. In that call was not only defiance but hope. The memory of that moment would outlive empires and echo across eternity. The end,